Hello everyone, I am Jo Flick with the Montana State Library and I'm here with your State Librarian Jennie Stapp. We're back for a website chat. We weren't here in July, so we've actually got quite a bit to catch up on today. So let's get started. Jennie, just a second. Let's see, let me just move that down.
And Jo, I'm going to close my door.
Okay.
Because we have staff that are laughing, and I'm glad to hear them laughing, but we don't need to have that echoing over the mic either.
Okay, so let's just get to the next slide. So just a reminder that we do record these website chats as we do with most of our webinars at the State Library. We do have an album for the website chats. I try to keep the most recent ones available for you and keep that album pretty clean. There's only about 3 or maybe 4 recordings up there, so you watch the most recent one. Since this is kind of a newsy, current information based activity, learning activity, these are eligible for CE credit, and if you want to let teacher librarians know, they can also, if they tune in live, request OPI credit for me and I'll send them a certificate. But here's the information, and if you ever need this electronically, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send it to you. We find that about 5 times as many people watch the recording as listen in live. So we know that it's very useful. And just an update on, we have a lot of training coming up in the next couple months, starting with, and this doesn't even count the shared catalog activities that are planned as well, but although some of them, the shared catalog folks will be in Sydney, and we just had a change of that. We won't be meeting at the Sydney Public Library. We will be meeting at the Conference Hotel, which is the Best Western Golden Plains in Sydney. And that'll be on September 17th. It's a full day of training. We have a whole morning with cataloging with the shared catalog staff. And in the afternoon, I see Pam joined us. There's going to be an update on statistics, so reporting your public library statistics, and then about a 1-hour introduction to the 2020 census and where you can find resources and the things that you can plan and activities. We're putting together some materials for that. Tracy and I will be offering census training several different places across the state, actually looking for some opportunities to schedule more census training in the western part of the state, since we'll be starting in eastern Montana. And let's see, I should mention, this comes before that, the Ready to Read Rendezvous, it is full. So, but just to mention, that's happening September 6th and 8th. If you're not already on the list, let Amelia know that you're interested for the next Ready to Read Rendezvous. We're actually limiting attendance to that to a fairly small group, because we're doing a project-based learning activity with Ready to Read Rendezvous now. And then Ripple, the Research Institute for Public Libraries, that is happening in Billings, and we're collaborating with the Wyoming Public State Library, I should say, on that. And it's open to anyone to attend. We've got registrants coming from all over the country, actually, mostly from Montana and Wyoming, but a few folks have come in from other states. And we're up to, when I checked today, we were closing in. We have about 6 or 7 seats left before that will be full. So if you are thinking about attending this institute, it's really a great training for learning how to really be more research-based in your decision-making and data-focused at your library. The Colorado State Library actually puts these regional ripples on around the country, and we're really excited to bring them to Montana for you. And then in October, we've moved back our Getting to Know You orientation to the State Library, which is really intended for newish librarians to come to Helena, meet our staff, get to know a little bit about what we do, both for the public and for you. And we pushed that back due to some scheduling conflicts and also some of the reorganization that we've been doing at the State Library. So that'll be toward the end of October, weather permitting, starting to get into the time where that's hard. And then just put this on your calendar for next spring. We may not use all this time, June 8th through 11th, but keep it available. We might finish a little early. We don't have the program put together yet, but we do have the Ursuline Center booked in Great Falls for June 8th through the 11th, and I'm in the process of contracting a facilitator right now. So just lots going on the training front. That's all I have. And Jenny, this is your agenda for the day.
Well, and that is just a lot. So thanks for that overview. Lots of great learning opportunities. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. As Joe said, it's been a little while, so we have quite a bit that I want to just review with all of you. A lot of activity going on here at the State Library as we start this next fiscal year. The Commission had their regular August Commission meeting last Wednesday, the 14th. And one of the key things that came out of that meeting that I want to make sure you're aware of is that they elected new officers. That's typical for their August Commission meeting. So Ann Kish from Western was elected chair of the commission, and Ken Wall was elected the vice chair. Ken is a commissioner out of Missoula who owns a GIS company called Geodata Solutions. And so they'll be our commission leadership for the next year. And the other action item that they took at their commission meeting was to adopt the strategic pathway for certification. That's a program that I know some of you have been involved with helping us pilot at the State Library, and Gail Bacon has joined us. Gail attended the commission meeting in August to speak on behalf of the strategic pathway option. We're really excited to be able to think about how we can incorporate more independent learning and independent study into the CE options that we certify here at the State Library. We know that the rigid forms for attaining CE have not always met your needs in the best way. And so this new continuing education option that aligns the strategic goals of your libraries to continuing education opportunities through independent learning is, I think, going to be much more beneficial for all of you in your own professional development and in the development of your libraries. I'm also really proud of Joe and our staff here at the State Library. This is really a new model for states to think about when they look at offering continuing education and certification, and I know other states are looking to Montana for our leadership in this area. And Joe, do you want to add some specifics about next steps for rolling out the strategic pathway?
Sure. So our plan is to make it available to all Montana librarians by the end of this calendar year. That involves us doing some kind of behind the scenes work to get everything up and running in Aspen, so you can file your professional development plan in Aspen, and we can kind of track this your progress in Aspen the way that you do sort of currently. And I will just add that one of the recommendations that came out of our pilot was to make this pathway available to people for renewal of their CE. So if it's your first time getting certification with us, you will use the traditional pathway. That's not going away. This will just be a new pathway for what we're considering librarians that are a little more seasoned with us here in Montana and ready to kind of strike out in a direction, maybe have a specific focus for their professional development. And so I'm pretty excited about it, and I'm happy to answer questions. There'll be a lot more information coming down the pike. We're planning some webinars later this fall as we get more of the behind the scenes work in place. And big thank you to Gail Bacon for attending the meeting and speaking on behalf of the pilot. She's been a kind of a mentor to me as I've been playing around with different potential models for trying to get this work done. So thanks, Gail.
Any questions or comments from anybody? Joe, do you want to share a couple of examples of the focus of the study from some of the pilot participants?
Sure. So one of the things that we did with the pilot was we looked for different types of libraries to be involved and ones that had different challenges in approaching this pathway. So we did have a new librarian, a person that was new to Montana libraries and to her position. We had some libraries that have been really working with professional development plans for a while. We had some non-public librarians, a special library, who participated. And I think some of the comments that we received that were most insightful to me were librarians who felt like this gave them the opportunity to really specialize and focus their professional development so that they weren't having to get just sort of a general certification and kind of fill in the boxes. And so, for instance, a good example of that was Desiree Funsid at Missoula. Missoula has it on their strategic plan to be a #1 quality resource for people doing genealogy research in Montana statewide. They'd like to be an important genealogy resource for researchers. And Desiree really focused on that. Went to through a certification program at Boston University and really focused all of her training on improving her expertise and her ability to share that expertise with others at her library and be kind of the point person for that strategic goal of the library. So that was an interesting approach. We had another librarian who really wanted to focus in on a specific set of leadership skills she wanted to develop. So that was really kind of off the mark. She's actually taking a lot of professional development courses that are not really library specific and wouldn't count under our current certification program as credit. So that was good. The Choteau County Public Library approached this as a whole library, and they wanted all of their library to improve the safety and security at their library. So they also took this as an opportunity to step a little bit outside of traditional librarianship, although the staff is still getting a lot of credits that toward their traditional kinds of areas, but they were able to focus on safety and security of the library, and the whole library took CPR courses and disaster preparedness training, and it's just an important part of what they wanted to accomplish at their library short term, and so it worked for them that way. So I think it actually was applied in a lot of different ways. So we're excited to see what happens next, how much trouble we can get ourselves into with this.
And the real key point is tying it back to a library's strategic goals and making the learning most meaningful for what you want to achieve in your libraries and your communities. And I think that's just going to be really impactful.
Right. So the library's strategic plan is really the framework for the professional development plan that people create and then follow to get their certification. So instead of starting with the framework we have, which is the 4 categories and 60 credits, you still have to get 60 credits. You still need the equivalent of 60 credits. But now you use your strategic plan as that framework. So it's kind of a little bit of a bottom-up idea. But I think, like you said, it's much more a meaningful process. And we really do want to pay attention to library strategic plans and what that evolving need, that local community need is. That's it.
Thanks, Joe. Any other questions or comments? So the other important work that the State Library is doing right now and that we had discussions about with the Commission last week is our work plan for the coming year. This is the time of year where staff are thinking about the projects and priorities that we want to accomplish over the coming year. Some of them are continuations from work that we've done in the past year that carry forward. A lot of them are new ideas that we have had conversations with the Network Advisory Council and with the Montana Shared Catalog Executive Board, Montana Library to Go Executive Board, and so forth. So as we've been gathering information, we've been planning for these kinds of work objectives. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of these that pertain most specifically to the library community, so that you have a heads up on some of the work that's going to be coming out of the State Library in the coming year. Some of them we've hit upon already. As Joe shared, we are going to be hosting the regional Ripple the early part of October. I'm very excited about bringing that opportunity for Montana. Several state library staff, as well as other librarians in the state, have attended Ripple conferences in the past. There have been a couple hosted in Colorado in recent years. It was really attending that meeting and then doing some follow-up work with the Network Advisory Council and our commission that changed the state library's approach in how we do our own work planning and evaluation, so that it is much more data-driven. We think about the resources we need to conduct our work, the outputs that we want to see from our work, the outcomes, and hopefully be able to plan for and document the impact that we're seeing in our work. And part of that is being able to think about the kinds of data we collect that demonstrate those outputs and impacts, and how we make use of that data to do our ongoing evaluation. Those are the key themes from Ripple. And we've been striving to build that kind of data-driven culture within the State Library. We really think it will be beneficial for libraries in Montana to think about and explore that kind of model for yourselves to help in your own planning, as well as the advocacy work that goes on in your libraries. So I'm glad that we're able to have this great group of people come together for some intense learning. And then our staff are planning to do a follow-up with the cohort of learners to really take some next steps to think about how we can implement the learning from the regional Ripple over the next year and beyond. There's a couple of other projects that are in development here at the State Library. We are currently testing the ebook platform for the Digital Public Library of America. We're partnering with a couple of libraries, large and small, to evaluate how use of that platform might have some impact for especially those members of Montana Library to Go, as well as how the State Library improves discovery of some of the content that we maintain in our own collections. The Digital Public Library of America, some of you might be familiar with it as a discovery hub for a lot of really rich cultural content that's being created by libraries around the country that's then being surfaced through their interface, the Montana Memory Project, University of Montana, Montana State University, and the Historical Society, and in partnership with the North Dakota State Library, all contribute content to the DPLA through that Cultural Resources interface. DPLA is now hosting an ebook platform that is intended to be sort of a hub of different kinds of ebook content, including our existing Overdrive content, any kind of licensed content that your libraries might have through Baker and Taylor or other kinds of ebook providers. They don't yet offer e-audio, but that's a development that's supposed to be available this last quarter of this year. And then the State Library has content that is also available in ebook form, including all of our digitized state publications. And so through this circulation manager, we are testing our ability to bring all of that content together in a way that would be available to your users in a single user interface, rather than having patrons have to go to different user interfaces for different platforms. And then in addition to bringing all of that content together, we'll be testing how we can improve discovery of some of the more unique content that's unique to Montana. And we're also looking at how we can bring in additional public domain content and improve browsability of interesting content that might draw attention of our users and help alleviate some of the concerns that we've been having about long holds queues and those kinds of things. So that's some of the testing and learning that we're exploring over the next year or so with DPLA and thinking about how we can roll that out to additional libraries. Cara is one of our lead staff taking the lead on that kind of project, and she's working with the Butte Public Library, the Sheridan County Public Library, the Great Falls Public Library. I'm sure I'm missing someone in there too.
Missoula.
We are
Missoula.
Missoula.
Thank you, Cara.
One of the other important tasks that the State Library is tackling this year is a revision of the public library standards. It's been about 10 years since we went through the last revision of the public library standards. Of course, these are the standards that libraries strive to meet in order to provide essential library services to your community, and they're also tied to the public state aid funding that the state offers to public libraries. Libraries have to once a year certify that they're meeting the minimum public library standards in order to qualify for that funding. A couple of things that we've noted about the current public library standards. They're very input and output driven. There's not a lot of thinking about the kinds of outcomes and impacts that we want to see from our library services, and so we'll be evaluating how the public library standards can become more output and impact driven, not just input and output driven. So that's one of the questions that we're asking ourselves. We also want to structure the public library standards in a way that they encourage more outward focused library services rather than library services that focus on internal library processes, procedures, and services. So really thinking about 21st century library models that are focused on community development and turning outwards. We've sat a task force of librarians to help us with this effort. So in addition to state library staff, Mitch Grady from Livingston, Sandra Larson from Fort Benton, Megan Haddix from Glasgow, Joy Bridwell from, oh, just escaped me,
Rocky Boy,
thank you. Mark Weatherington from Hamilton, Jeannie Lilligard from Stanford, Dawn Kingstad from Glendive, and Megan Glidden from Kalispell. And then Bruce Newell is going to be representing the State Library Commission. I also want to mention that we're including Joy because right now tribal libraries are not required to complete public library standards, and they are also not eligible for state aid. And so we want to think about how we can open up those opportunities to tribal libraries as well. The first meeting of this task force is scheduled for September 13th, and they are tasked with helping us evaluate the current library standards. We're going to be looking at standards that exist in other states. We'll be considering things like our own library development task force recommendations that were developed a few years ago, and so forth. The timeline for the development of the standards is fairly extended. The task force will be meeting in September and October. We hope to present some draft recommendations to the Commission, maybe at their December timeline and their December meeting, and then we're going to allow for fairly extensive public comment on the draft standards. The commission then would consider the public comment and move the standards into an administrative rules process later this spring. The public library standards are all included in administrative rule, and so that process also includes extensive public comment and the option of public hearings if members of the public wish us to undertake those public hearings. All of that takes place before the standards are finally adopted as formal administrative rules. And then we've built into the timeline a full year for transition, so libraries can begin to implement those standards during FY21, a year from now, have a full year to think about that. The new standards would officially go into practice July 1 of 2021, and libraries would then certify that they meet those standards the following summer in 2022. So it's a very extended process to begin to adopt these new standards and put them into practice in your libraries. Any question about that work? You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the coming months.
No comments in the chat box either at this point. And if something comes to mind later, feel free to pop it in the chat box whenever it pops into your head, and we'll certainly plan to have a little extra time at the end to get back to some of these important topics.
One quick thing that I wanted to mention that I'm excited about, at the recommendation of the Network Advisory Council, we're budgeting about $10,000 to contract with someone from the economic development community to help us better understand how we might invest our resources to help libraries play a deeper role in economic development and workforce development in your communities around Montana. This is an area where we don't have that kind of expertise on staff, and we're following a model that we've used to develop our early literacy programming, where we've contracted for a number of years with Cindy Crispin out of the Bozeman Public Library. As you all know, she's been instrumental in helping us develop the Ready to Read program and creating partnerships and serving as a liaison with different kinds of early literacy organizations in Montana and around the country. And she's been involved in providing significant professional development to all of you to help promote children's services and early literacy. Again, we're hoping to follow that same kind of model where we find an expert in the economic development community who can serve as that liaison for the library community to the state's Economic Development Association, the Chambers of Commerce, the Workforce Development Board, and other kinds of organizations to think about the role libraries might play with those kinds of associations and in our community to help us think about opportunities for more professional development and programming and services to help all of you support economic development in your communities. So we have a lot of learning to do over the course of the next year through that contract. We have two significant requests for information followed by requests for proposal that Cara is working on this year, and Cara's joined me to make sure you have the information you need. The first one is an RFI RFP for Montana Library to Go. That contract is up for renewal at the end of this fiscal year, and so we're going to be conducting an RFI followed by an RFP to look at what other options exist for the ebook e-audio platform that we make use of through Montana Library to Go. And then the other RFI RFP is for those services that are currently offered through the OCLC Group Services contract. They include our cataloging services, including copy and original cataloging done through OCLC. interlibrary loan that's conducted through OCLC, and then management of the Content DM content management system platform that supports the Montana Memory Project. All of those services right now fall under the umbrella of the OCLC Group Services contract. We've managed that contract as what the state calls a sole source contract, really since its inception decades ago at this point. And we've become aware of differing usage of those services over the course of the last several years. For example, in the past, we required all members of the Montana Shared Catalog to also buy into the OCLC Group Services contract to make use of interlibrary loan and cataloging. But for example, most school libraries really don't do interlibrary loan. And many of the Montana Shared Catalog libraries, especially for in-state resource sharing, are making use of user sharing groups within the shared catalog rather than traditional interlibrary loan. So we think we're likely overpaying for some of those services under the current terms of that contract. We also know that how libraries are approaching cataloging is changing as we've seen workforce changes and resources shifting towards more user services rather than those kinds of technical services. So we're considering what other kinds of workflow models might exist for cataloging services. We've been fairly dissatisfied with Content DM as a content management system platform for a number of years, and we know that there are other options out there. So under this RFI, RFP, we're going to be asking for the vendor community to respond to all of those components or just certain components of services that are currently offered under that group services contract. We're working with members of the Network Advisory Council that are helping Cara develop the structure for the RFI, RFP, the questions that we need to be considering. We are very concerned that for both of these RFI, RFPs, we really understand the services that you require from these contracts and the workflows that you have in place that make use of these services so that we can be sure that we are asking for the appropriate information through these processes and evaluating the services that vendors share with us when they respond to these RFI, RFPs. We hope to go out with the RFI through the State Procurement Office this next month, and then be able to evaluate those responses later this fall, and then go out to RFP in the winter, and then have time to evaluate responses to the RFP over the spring. Both of these contracts need to either be renewed or move forward in a different form by this next fiscal year. Cara, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think you summarized that very well. I'm going to put a link in the chat to our information page where we will keep you updated on where we are in the timeline. The roster for each committee is on this page, and any committee materials will be posted here as well so that you can see what kinds of questions they are developing for the procurement process and what kind of criteria we're looking at for the scoring process. And of course, if you have questions, comments, observations, please send them to me. I'll share them with the committee. And we are currently, we've just got our committees together, and they are starting to draft some criteria, which we expect to review and start to draft that RFI by mid-September. So please be in touch if you have questions or suggestions for this process.
Thanks, Cara.
And Jenny, if we can circle back for just a second to the standards review, Denise Ard had a question about how, if you have a suggestion for the committee, for the task force, I should say, how would you get in touch or provide input? Is there process you want them to go through for that, or what are your suggestions?
If you have thoughts and ideas right now, I would please feel free to email them to me or to Tracy Cook. Once we have the the task force better established, we'll also include a public comment forum for information there. But if you have suggestions right now, please feel free to email me or Tracy. For those of you who are in public libraries, I hope you all received your Gigabit Toolkit. That was a contract that we concluded at the end of this last year, where many of you worked with Chad to understand your broadband connectivity and hardware and networking requirements within your library. We were able to complete the toolkits for, I think, about 115 of the 117 libraries and branches around the state. And not surprisingly, we know that many libraries are facing very significant challenges with regard to their ability to access high standard broadband in your areas. A lot of libraries still struggle with hardware refreshment and networking upgrades. I hope that the information available to your individual libraries through the toolkit will be of use to you as you work with your boards to think about these challenges. We are just beginning to analyze the data that's available through all of the really rich data that was collected through this process. We're going to be putting all that data into a database and using NGIS to better analyze that information. I hope to use what we learn to inform some kind of program that we can use to help address some of the challenges. In the past, we've had opportunities for hardware refreshment through various grant programs. Some of you were involved with the BTOP grant a number of years ago, where we used the resources to upgrade broadband and support E-rate. A couple of legislative sessions ago, the State Library put in a budget request that would have funded increases to broadband connectivity for libraries around the state. Those are the kinds of examples that, as we better understand the data and therefore better understands the needs, we can begin to shape a plan to begin to address some of those challenges. And again, we'll be working with the State Library Commission and the Network Advisory Council on what those options look like as we move forward. Cara is going to continue to work with the Montana Shared Catalog Executive Board and the Montana Library to Go Executive Board to consider the cost share formulas that exist for membership in those consortia, as well as other cost share formulas that we have, including the OCLC Group Services contract. We really want to come to a better place in how we have those kinds of member fees developed. We want them to encourage participation in those consortia rather than serve as a deterrent. We want those cost share formulas or a single cost share formula to be able to absorb budget concerns that libraries might be facing from time to time. There's some significant challenges. There's lots of opportunity for us to think about how we can improve affordability for the services that we offer. So another effort that Cara is going to be leading with those groups. And then finally, I wanted to mention that we are working with the legislature on a study of state library funding. As many of you have heard me talk about, the legislature passed House Bill 633 this last session that calls for the Legislative Finance Committee to conduct a study of how the state library funds our digital library services. And That study is going to get underway here this next month in September. The Legislative Finance Committee has sat a subcommittee that includes members of that committee as well as members of the Education Policy Committee and the Environmental Quality Council to evaluate our current funding, the costs associated with the different services that we offer, and to evaluate different kinds of funding models with the hope of finding options for more diverse and more stable funding sources for the State Library. So that will be a significant focus of my effort over the next year. If they are successful, that would result in legislation that would be proposed in the 2021 legislative session. So that's just a quick overview of some of the work that the State Library is going to be conducting this next year. We hope you'll continue to be involved, asking questions, sharing comments and feedback as you hear more and more about these different activities over the next several months. And then finally, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time focusing on the Census 2020 work. That is yet another work plan item for us leading up to the start of the census, which will start, well, Census Day will be April 1, 2020, but there's a lot of lead up to that going on. I appreciate those of you who participated in a survey that Joe submitted to help us better understand how you are involving your libraries in the census work going on in your communities, and to help us better understand your needs around the census that we can begin to support. So far, we've had about half of the libraries respond. We know that 5 libraries have joined local complete count committees. Those complete count committees are beginning to be formed around the state. I think recently I saw about a dozen communities have complete count committees, either at the city or county level. Those are the groups that are focused on how to get the word out about the census. 5 libraries have identified census champions. We think this is a really important step for libraries to take, to designate someone on your staff or your board or volunteer who can be a liaison for your library to understand and be involved in census-related activities that are going on in your communities. 12 libraries reported that they're discussing options for promoting the census. About 30% of respondents said they've checked out resources provided by the American Library Association. The American Library Association has done a great job of developing materials to help libraries understand the census taking process and the importance of completing the census. At least one library noted that they're going to provide space in the library for people who are completing the census and for applicants applying for census jobs, another need that's occurring here in the state right now, and so that's a great option. Many of you said you're looking for materials from the State Library to help promote the census, and the census has told us that they are coming out this fall. We are going to receive materials from the census directly that we will then be distributing to all of you. As Joe mentioned, there's some upcoming trainings going on about the census at the fall workshop in Sydney, and we'll be looking at how we can provide more training options in the future. We've been looking at coordinating a statewide Census Day on Census Day, April 1st, 2020, so that's something that we're thinking about as well. So in the meantime, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please be raising them with us, and we'll do our best to get you more information or find out answers. Really, the focus right now is just on making people aware that the census is coming, that it's going to be taken largely online, and that the libraries are places that are available to help people take the census if they don't have internet access. There will be options to complete the census via phone and through in-person visits from enumerators if people don't complete the census online, but largely the effort is to get people and encourage people to take the census online. I know that there are some questions and concerns, some wariness about the census itself and how the government might use that information, some mistrust in the government overall, especially with all of the dialogue around the citizenship question and what happened there. One of the points I really want to emphasize with librarians is that by law, the census cannot share personally identifiable information that's collected through the census process. They can only share summary statistical information, and that's a law that's been in place for decades. So there shouldn't be concern for people taking the census that personally identifiable information is going to be shared in any way that might have negative repercussions. And I think it's a really important opportunity for librarians to get involved in promoting the census because of the trusted relationship people in our communities have with our libraries. So I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any more questions, comments about the census or anything else that we talked about today or anything else you've heard going on at the State Library.
And I'm going to put a link up to this page that I'm showing right now, which is Montana's sort of census information page. Jenny, you sit on a committee both at the state and national level to help our census takers understand the role that libraries can play. We know that libraries are concerned about maybe being overrun. I will say I was talking to the folks, well, to one of the folks who was involved in the pilot that was conducted in Rhode Island, and libraries were not overwhelmed, and they had a pretty good response rate to the online. So people can respond online or by phone. They don't have to have a computer to respond. But I think the important thing is to just get the word out to people of that change so that they're not waiting for a form to come in the mail to them. And I think libraries can help get the word out on that. We are planning a lot more training. So starting in Sydney, Tracy and I will then be planning at least a couple more face-to-face trainings this fall, and we'll be doing some webinars following that. So everybody will have a chance to get some training about what to expect with the census, and we're also planning to have some Montana-specific resources out there for you as well. Some bookmarks, posters you can put up, stand-up posters by your circulation desk, just reminding people that this is coming and of the change about how the data is being collected. And then this particular census, this is really a good resource that what I have on the screen right here that you're welcome to share with your staff and board about why this particular slide in this story map, why it's so important in Montana.
Mm-hmm. And specifically for librarians, a reminder that the census count is what drives the funding for state aid. It's tied specifically to that census count.
So $2,000 per person. That's man, woman, and child. So let's see, are there any questions that have come in? Nope.
Okay.
I thought sure we were going to go long today, so I'm going to stop our recording unless you have anything else to add.
Nope. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for tuning in.